The message arrived across the darkness of the Malacca Strait in 1947. First came a sequence of desperate Morse signals, SOS from Ourang Medan. Then came the words that would transform a maritime mystery into one of the most disturbing legends ever recorded. All officers, including captain, are dead. All dead. I die. There was no explanation of what had happened aboard the ship. No location detailed the nature of the emergency, and no voice came through the radio to describe what the crew was facing. Then, according to the surviving accounts, the transmission stopped, leaving only the silence of the sea. The vessel sending those signals was said to be the SS Ourang Medan, a freighter whose exact history remains difficult to establish. Even the basic facts surrounding the ship are surrounded by uncertainty, because much of the story comes from later reports rather than an independently verified official record. But in the summer of 1947, the distress signals reportedly reached other ships navigating the region. Among those who received the transmission was the American merchant vessel Silver Star, which was said to have been close enough to investigate. The first message was alarming, the second was worse, and the final transmission suggested that whoever was operating the radio was no longer simply calling for help, but watching the entire crew disappear around him. The Silver Star changed course toward the reported position. For the crew aboard the rescue vessel, the mission should have been straightforward: locate the disabled freighter, board her, identify the emergency, and bring the survivors to safety. Instead, they were approaching a ship that appeared to be completely silent. There were no obvious signs of a struggle from a distance, no frantic crew members waving from the deck, and no radio operator answering further calls. As the Silver Star came alongside, the Ourang Medan reportedly looked strangely intact. The ship was not described as a wreck, and there was no obvious indication that a catastrophe had already occurred. Yet something about the vessel was profoundly wrong. A ship had sent an emergency message claiming that everyone aboard was dead, and now there was no one left to explain why. The rescue team prepared to board. What they found inside would become the central horror of the Ourang Medan story. The bodies were reportedly scattered throughout the ship. Officers were found dead in different locations, while other crew members lay where they had apparently collapsed. What made the scene so disturbing was not simply the number of dead men. It was the condition in which they were allegedly discovered. Their eyes were described as being wide open. Their faces were said to be locked in expressions resembling extreme fear, pain, or agony. Some accounts claimed that the bodies appeared to be staring toward the sky or some unseen presence. Their arms were reportedly extended or frozen in unnatural positions, as though they had been pointing at something in their final moments. And yet there was another detail that made the scene even more difficult to understand. According to the story, there were no obvious physical wounds, no bullets, no visible knife injuries, no clear evidence of a conventional attack. The dead appeared to have died suddenly, without giving the rescuers any obvious explanation. The ship itself offered no immediate answer. There was reportedly no survivor capable of telling the rescuers what had happened. The radio operator who had transmitted the final message was also said to be dead. For the boarding crew, every unanswered question created another. If the crew had been murdered, where was the attacker? If they had been poisoned, what substance could have killed so many people so quickly? And if something catastrophic had happened inside the ship, why had there been no obvious warning before the final transmission? Then came one of the strangest elements of the entire story. The rescue operation did not have time to become an investigation. Something began going terribly wrong aboard the Ourang Medan. According to the account, smoke began rising from somewhere within the ship. The danger appeared to be coming from the cargo or the lower sections of the vessel. The Silver Star crew was forced to abandon the freighter. They returned to their own ship and watched as the situation aboard the Ourang Medan deteriorated. Then the ship reportedly exploded. A massive blast tore through the vessel, turning an already mysterious death scene into a rapidly unfolding disaster. The Ourang Medan was engulfed in flames before sinking beneath the waters of the Malacca Strait. Whatever evidence remained aboard the ship disappeared with it. The bodies, the cargo, the machinery. The radio equipment and potentially the answers to the deaths were carried into the depths. And this is where the mystery becomes fundamentally different from an ordinary maritime disaster. The ship could no longer be examined in a controlled investigation. The evidence was gone. The witnesses had only limited time aboard the vessel, and the surviving documentation surrounding the incident was incomplete. For decades, the Ourang Medan would exist somewhere between historical event and maritime legend. But if the story is stripped of its more sensational elements, two explanations remain particularly interesting. The first involves hazardous chemicals. One theory proposes that the ship may have been secretly transporting dangerous substances. During the years surrounding the Second World War, chemical weapons and toxic compounds existed in enormous quantities, and the disposal or transportation of such materials was a serious problem. Some versions of the Ourang Medan story suggest that the ship could have been carrying substances such as nerve agents or potassium cyanide. If chemicals had leaked from improperly stored cargo, the consequences could have been catastrophic. Potassium cyanide, for example, can interfere with the body's ability to use oxygen. In sufficiently concentrated exposure, death can occur rapidly. Nerve agents are even more devastating. They disrupt the nervous system and can cause respiratory failure, convulsions, loss of consciousness, and death. Such substances could theoretically explain a sudden mass casualty event without requiring obvious physical wounds. They could also provide a possible explanation for why the crew appeared to have died in the middle of whatever they were doing. But there is a major problem. There is no reliable physical evidence confirming that the Ourang Medan was carrying nerve gas or potassium cyanide. The theory exists largely because of the circumstances surrounding the legend, not because investigators recovered a verified cargo manifest proving the presence of these substances. There is also a darker possibility. If a hazardous chemical cargo had been involved, the mysterious explosion that sank the ship could have been connected to the same chain of events: heat, chemical reactions, damaged containers, or attempts to handle dangerous materials could potentially have turned a toxic leak into a fire or explosion. But once again, there is no surviving evidence strong enough to establish that this actually happened aboard the Ourang Medan. The second major theory is considerably less exotic: carbon monoxide. A malfunctioning boiler or combustion system could theoretically produce large quantities of carbon monoxide, an invisible and highly dangerous gas. Because it has no reliable warning smell, people can be exposed without realizing that anything is wrong. In a confined environment, the gas could accumulate. Crew members might initially experience confusion, weakness, dizziness, and impaired judgment before losing consciousness. That possibility could explain why a large number of people might die without obvious external injuries. It could also explain why there may have been no conventional struggle or attack. The boiler room becomes particularly important under this theory. If combustion was incomplete or ventilation failed, dangerous gases could potentially move through enclosed sections of the vessel. A crew member might become incapacitated before understanding what was happening. And if the crew were already weakened or unconscious, a secondary mechanical failure or fire could make the situation even worse. Eventually, the ship could have suffered the reported explosion. Unlike the chemical smuggling theory, the carbon monoxide explanation does not require a secret military cargo. It requires only a catastrophic failure in an enclosed industrial environment. But it has weaknesses too. Carbon monoxide poisoning does not perfectly explain every dramatic detail associated with the story. The reported expressions, body positions, and wide-open eyes are difficult to use as reliable forensic evidence because the original observations were not preserved in a modern medical investigation. There is another problem that shadows every theory. We do not know with certainty whether the story happened exactly as later accounts claimed. The Ourang Medan case became widely known through publications and retellings that appeared after the alleged incident. Researchers have struggled to find contemporary official documentation that conclusively verifies the entire sequence. Some investigators have therefore suggested that the story may have been exaggerated, distorted, or even fabricated. That possibility cannot simply be dismissed. The absence of reliable records does not prove that the disaster never happened. But it does mean that details often presented as established facts should be treated cautiously. The famous final Morse message may have been real. The deaths may have been real. The Silver Star may have encountered a ship in distress, or the story may have grown over time, with each retelling adding another terrifying detail. There is one particularly haunting problem with the mystery. The sea never gave investigators a second chance. Once the Ourang Medan sank, the physical evidence became inaccessible. Any cargo manifest, mechanical, failure, toxic substance, human remains, or piece of equipment that might have explained the deaths disappeared beneath the water. And that is why the mystery has survived. Not because we know what killed the crew, but because we cannot conclusively determine what happened. Imagine standing aboard the deck of the Silver Star in 1947, watching an apparently abandoned freighter disappear beneath the waves. You know that somewhere below you are the bodies of men whose final moments may never be reconstructed. The radio message still echoes in the historical record. All officers, including captain, are dead. Then the final words, "I die." Whether those words came from a real radio operator facing an unknown catastrophe, or became part of a story transformed by decades of repetition, their effect remains the same. The Ourang Medan has become a symbol of one of the ocean's oldest terrors, the possibility that something can happen far from witnesses, leave almost no evidence, and disappear forever before anyone understands it. Perhaps a poisonous cargo killed the crew. Perhaps a silent gas leak turned the ship into a death trap. Perhaps an entirely different chain of events occurred, one that the surviving accounts never captured. Or perhaps the greatest mystery is not what killed the men aboard the Ourang Medan. Perhaps it is how much of their final story was lost before anyone ever reached them. The sea covers wrecks with darkness, pressure, and time. And somewhere beneath the waters of the Malacca Strait, if the Ourang Medan truly carried the evidence described in the legend, its final secret may still be resting exactly where the men left it. The question is no longer whether the ocean remembers what happened. The question is whether, beneath thousands of tons of water and decades of silence, the ocean is still keeping a secret that was never meant to be found. Fade to black.